We have a couple counties who were affected by the disaster, and we need to set up IA PDAs for them.
We need some assistance down here for some PDAs.
We did have flooding all the way from where Steel Creek enters the village, all the way to the Mohawk River.
All the way to the Mohawk River. You can see here our homes that we identified that were underwater when we did the aerial PDA flyover.
Disasters and emergencies impact communities across the United States every year. Floods, severe storms, wildfires, hurricanes, and other events disrupt the lives of U.S. residents, who then look to FEMA to help get them on the road to recovery. When a community is affected by a disaster, a request can be made for a joint team of emergency management officials to conduct an assessment to determine the extent and impact of damage.
We'll have to look at what our sheltering needs are going to be and what FEMA can do to help us with alternative housing.
The Preliminary Damage Assessment, or PDA, is the first step in determining whether a community could be eligible for federal disaster assistance. FEMA and its partners work together to create a uniform procedure for performing a PDA. Establishing a single set of procedures ensures that regardless of the location and type of disaster, the assessment will be consistent and thorough. After a disaster has occurred, several types of assessments are completed by state, local, tribal, and territorial emergency management teams. Damage to public infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, and utilities, are handled by a separate FEMA program known as Public Assistance. This video will focus on the losses that directly impact individuals and households. This type of assessment is known as an Individual Assistance PDA. This video is designed to promote a standardized individual assistance PDA process while defining the roles of those involved with the PDA team and describing how the information is gathered and used. Successful preliminary damage assessments rely on a close partnership between state, local, tribal, territorial, and federal officials, as well as voluntary organizations. Elected leaders have the important task of prompting the initial damage assessment after an event. If the damage is beyond the jurisdiction's capability, they will communicate with the state emergency management official about the extent and location of damage.
The best route for the teams to get to your location.
State or territorial emergency management personnel are at the center of the PDA process. They compile the incoming data received at their operations center to substantiate the actual damage being reported by local jurisdictions. After the state or territory validates these reports and evaluates the situation, they are responsible for determining if the event is beyond their capability. If so, the state or territory will request FEMA to perform a joint IA PDA.
Because we didn't know if the occupants were out of that house, so fortunately,
The IAPDA includes a joint team of government and tribal representatives and sometimes voluntary organizations. While several members are involved, the ideal size of the team should be smaller for a more efficient assessment. The length of time for conducting a PDA varies from a day to more than a week, depending on the extent of damage, how widespread the damage is, and if recurring events create additional damage. It is critical to understand that a FEMA PDA team cannot just show up after an event. In accordance with federal regulations, jurisdictions must communicate the extent of damage to their state emergency management official, who then in turn must request FEMA's participation. With successful partnerships and communication, the IAPDA team can be prepared to fulfill their roles and responsibilities. All disasters and emergencies begin and end at the local level. Local jurisdictions can be a city, township, county, or tribal nation, as well as borough, parish, village, unincorporated area, or rural educational attendance area. They play an important role in initiating and facilitating the IA preliminary damage assessment. As soon as an incident occurs, the jurisdiction needs to initiate a comprehensive assessment of the damaged area. This is more than just knowing where the damage is. They need to know how the community is impacted due to losses of life, housing, access, employment, and other services that impact individuals and households. Other factors to consider are whether homes are primary or secondary residences, and if they are insured for the type of damage. To avoid potential health hazards, emergency managers need to encourage individuals to clean up as soon as possible. Survivors may believe it is necessary to retain damaged items for proof of damage, but the observation of damaged household items is not necessary to complete the PDA. Survivors can take pictures to document the damage before taking the necessary health and safety precautions. For PDAs that will involve driving, emergency managers need to identify any safety issues, such as closed roads or other hazards. They need to provide the team with a description of the damage and a list of the locations that will be visited, as well as clearly marked maps. Emergency managers should also take measures to identify language barriers or other access and functional needs of individuals. The need for translators, interpreters, or other auxiliary aids and services should be identified early on, so the state or FEMA can provide them for the PDA team. Attention should also be given to understanding tribal sovereignty and identifying any cultural needs.
Sure their housing and any of their...
The State Emergency Management Office provides assistance by validating the initial damage assessment and determines if the incident is beyond their capability.
You know the expectations for when the team...
The state will coordinate with officials to schedule the date, the time, and a meeting location for the PDA pre-briefing.
In fact, follow that.
State emergency managers will have already planned ahead with local and tribal jurisdictions in determining which areas will be visited and who will be part of the team. It is important to note, FEMA assistance can only be provided if the governor representing the state makes a request. In each case, an IAPDA must be conducted to observe the amount and extent of damage, and only then can FEMA recommend what assistance may be available if a federal disaster is declared. FEMA's role in the PDA is to ensure that IA staff is trained to have an understanding of the Stafford Act programs, FEMA tribal policy, damage identification, and other federal agencies. Most importantly, FEMA is responsible for reporting the results of the PDA, reconciling any differences in the collected data, and obtaining concurrence of the findings with their state counterparts. The joint IA-PDA team usually consists of representatives from the state, FEMA, and the local jurisdiction. On most occasions, a representative from the Small Business Administration will also be a part of the joint PDA team. They collect data on damaged homes and businesses that might be eligible for the Disaster Loan Program, which can be granted independent of a presidential disaster declaration. There may be instances when additional players join the team for the purposes of fulfilling a specific role during the PDA. The FEMA Public Information Officer, or PIO, will join the team to act as a liaison in the event that media attention may arise. A FEMA tribal liaison will participate to communicate between FEMA and the tribal government. Language interpreters and translators may also accompany the team to bridge the communication gap for individuals. For the purpose of collecting data in relation to other federal programs, FEMA mitigation may join IA-PDA teams to conduct their own evaluation of the disaster's impact. However, no matter who becomes a part of the team, it is the state and FEMA IA that must agree on their observations to ensure that damage is captured and reported accurately.